But really it is like, how are we going to acknowledge God when something happens, even if we could, like, because our mind will go to, well, was it God? Like, it doesn't matter. If you're doing it by faith, if you're saying by faith, this was God, even if it was some medical miracle, which that would still mean God, a medical miracle. But I'm just saying, even if you could explain it away, are you going to choose to, you prayed about something and got something, are you going to choose to say, that's why, even if you could explain it away with a medical thing? Because sometimes it's been very close. Like, I know that people are going to think I'm crazy because, oh, well, this could be explained away. Like, you know, well, you went and saw this person, like that girl. Well, she was at the hospital. Maybe they did something. Maybe a test was wrong. Maybe but really, I wanted to be like, really, the tests were wrong? I even asked her multiple times on that call. So you for sure have cancer? Yes, I for sure have cancer. Like, they're not asked. This next testing isn't about whether I have cancer. It's about how bad the cancer is, what type of cancer, what. And I was like, okay, whatever. Don't acknowledge God, then it really is about the promised land. Like, eventually there's going to be a point where you're like, I don't get why this stuff isn't working for me. Well, were you acknowledging God all the way? This isn't because God needs your acknowledgement. It's for you. Because a lot of people will be like, well, why does God... Well, first of all, that's prideful. Why does God need your acknowledgement? But more than that, it's because it's for us, our benefit. Like, it's for our benefit that we remember him, because then we're able to receive more things. That's not my message for today. My message for today is about joy. But it kind of goes along with this, I think, because when we're believing God for things, how is our attitude in that time? And for a lot of people, it kind of goes along with peace too, but I really wanted to focus on joy. And I wanted to first say that a lot of people, I think, don't know, because I didn't know this, but joy and happiness are two different things. A lot of people think that joy and happiness are just synonyms, but they're really not, because one comes from emotions and another one comes from within us. Like, if that makes sense. And you'll see why I'm saying not within us, but like in us. It's in us already. It's in the Holy Spirit. It comes pouring out of us and in us. Whereas happiness is an emotion that we feel. We can be in the worst situation where we feel like a hard thing happening, but we can still have joy. And I've seen it for myself, where I've had joy in the midst of a hard situation, being told things that were really hard to hear, and still having joy, feeling like I can deal with this, like this huge thing that blew up in my face, and thinking I can deal with this because I have Jesus. I have joy in my heart, and that's what I'm talking about. And how do I know that it's something that's not like happiness, that's an emotion? Because it doesn't, the fruit of the Spirit isn't happiness, it's joy. That's one of the fruit of the Spirit, just like kindness. Kindness isn't an emotion, right? It's something we do, we have in us that comes out, right? Just like, so yes, is it good to be happy? Yes, but there's people that are happy with drugs, but they lack joy. There's people that are happy with, money, but they lack a lot of joy. They're really, in the end, they're really miserable. There's people that are, so that's why it's completely different. And you'll see as I go, like, how happiness isn't at all important. The most important thing is joy. And it's funny because it says, that it's a point where I don't remember where this is, but it's in the Gospels. But it says, for the kingdom of God is not a matter of eating and drinking. And it was talking, because you know how we get into legalistic things about you shouldn't eat this, you shouldn't drink this, and it was saying, like, it's not about that. The kingdom of God is a kingdom of righteousness, peace, and joy. So his kingdom is full of joy. It's not full of happiness, it's full of joy. Is there happiness in that joy? Yes. You'll find joy brings about a happiness, but sometimes joy surprisingly doesn't always bring about like the emotion of happiness. So, I'll just keep explaining. In Psalm 16:11, it says, "In your presence is fullness of joy." And that's why I'm saying in Jesus, there's joy. So, for example, for a long time, and I'll give you different scenarios of like me, like for a long time, for years I was depressed, and I went to a psychologist. I ended up with a psychiatrist that prescribed medication. Then the psychologist did all this testing, found out I was like clinically depressed. I had anxiety. I had OCD. Gosh, I wish I still had all the paperwork. It was like ridiculous the amount of things they diagnosed me with. They were like, at one point they were like, this was started with postpartum depression going into, now it's just turned in, you let it go for so long that now it's just turned into a really bad depression. And so, just being in that, I didn't have joy. I didn't have happiness either. But I wasn't going to have happiness without the joy. In the presence of Jesus, there's fullness of joy. And in his presence, there's fullness of joy. And I didn't have that. And that's why a lot of people are struggling. And that's why people are addicted, because they're looking for something that they think comes through happiness. That's why I was saying, like, sometimes we're like, oh, if I had all this money, I would be happy. You might, but then you would need more. That's why if you don't have joy, you're going to just keep needing more and more and more. And that's why a lot of people think it's only this is only about depression. Like, people are like, oh, depressed people, I feel bad for them. Well, the same thing that depressed people are looking for is the same thing that addicted people are looking for, that people with addicted to people. There's people that are addicted to other people and how they feel. There's people that are, addicted to money, jobs, whatever. That everyone is looking for happiness, but really ultimately what they need is joy. And this is why people continue to be depressed, continue to have lack of money even when they're rich. This is why people like, what is that actor's name? That really funny Miss Doubtfire? Robin Williams. I believe this is why Robin Williams probably killed himself, because even though he was a happy person, he didn't have joy, probably, because in the presence of God, there's fullness of joy. It's not in the presence of anyone else. You're not going to find joy in the world. You're not going to find joy in other people. You're not going to find, and this is a big one. Like, some people are like, well, I'm not addicted to drugs. I'm not addicted to this. I'm not addicted to that. But then they're looking for it in the people, either their spouses or their children or their friends, and they're not finding it there either, because people fail. Like, for me, I used to look for it in Johnny. Like, if Johnny was upset, I was upset. If Johnny was happy, I was happy. If Johnny was up, I was up. If Johnny was down, I was down. And that was with every relationship that I was around. I was like, it's like a roller coaster. You're always riding a roller coaster because you're looking for happiness in other people, and people are going to fail. It's not because they want to, it's because I can't have a good attitude all the time. I would love to have a good attitude all the time, but if Johnny counts on my happiness, then he'd be on the ground right now. Some days, like, I'm mad. Some days I have a bad attitude about things, and some days I don't, I get up grouchy. So this is why it's important to, like, have joy rather than happiness. And I believe that joy produces happiness in our hearts, but we need to have that first. So how do we find joy, and how do we get joy? And first of all, in his presence is fullness of joy. So it kind of goes back to what I was talking about last week. Read your word. In his presence, he's the word. That's his presence. In his word, you're going to find fullness of joy. Okay. So you're like, okay, well, how, so here's, for example, one of the ways we find joy. In John 16:24, it says, until now you have asked nothing in my name. Ask and you will receive. And then he proceeds to say that your joy may be full. So one of the first things that we don't do is ask and receive. We don't ask, and so we don't receive. But that's where that our joy may be full. Like, sometimes it's like, even for, like, I can't, like, say it's something, you need something, you're lacking something, then ask for that. And receive that. And that's where the fullness is. For example, for an addicted person, ask for healing. Because usually an addicted person is just looking for something to fill up the space that's hurting so bad. And instead, if they ask, they would receive healing. For example, like, one time I stood I was at a meeting where there was a prophet, and he was talking about healing, or he was talking about baggage, how it was a meeting for leaders. And so I was there, and he was saying, hey, a lot of people are still carrying a lot of baggage. Even you leaders are carrying a lot of baggage. And I knew it was true. I still had baggage. At least I had dealt with a lot of my baggage, but I was like, I know I've got still baggage, because I still have these, issues here and there. And so he's like, come on up. It was Decker. And he's like, come on up if you want to be prayed for. And so I was like, I think I've talked about this before, but I was like, okay, I want you to just take away all the baggage. I want to be done with the baggage, God. I want to be done with my life of like fixing all the little pits that I've fallen into, covering them up. So now I just want to go from glory to glory, like your word says. So I was like, I'm done. I want to be healed completely, whatever. So Pastor Decker gets to me and he's like, I should have gotten my thing, but now it's on my phone. But one of the things he said is he started off. He does not know me. He doesn't know me. This is just, he was someone else's pastor. We were invited to come to this conference, so we came. Never met him. Walk right up. He's also the same guy that told Johnny words that came out of Johnny's mouth. So I had already heard that out of him telling words that came out of Johnny's mouth that he had never been in a conversation with Johnny. So I was already like prepared in my heart to receive whatever he had. And then he tells me, what you're asking for is super hard. And I think I've shared this because I was like, it's super hard for you, God. You can't do this. And then years later, I was like, oh my God, it's super hard because it was going to be hard for me. Duh, this wasn't hard for you. Don't ask me why. At the time, I was like, oh my God, these are hard for God. And then after I went through it, I realized it was going to be super hard. It's like, what you're asking for is it's going to be really hard. But nonetheless, I'm going to do it for you. I'm going to give you healing, the healing balm of Gilead. It's going to come over you. And he said all this stuff. And then in that same time, a few weeks later, sorry, you're crying. A few weeks later, in that same time, Betsy and I were meeting, and she's like, gave me another verse that had to do with also my healing. So I held on to both of those verses, and I asked, that's what I did. I asked for my healing. And I received my healing. And you know what? I honestly believe that was, after that, I started seeing from that point on, I've never thought about this, but after that, I started seeing things just like go leaps and bounds of joy in my heart. And after that, I found out some things, for example, in my life that I had never known, that were really hard to bear, that were going to be so hard for me. But if I would have found them out before the healing, I would have fallen apart. Because I know myself, I was like the person that this thing that I found out, and I'm only not sharing it because it's part of someone else's testimony, so that's why I'm not sharing it. But this thing that I found out would have broken me down, and I wouldn't have known how to deal with it. But when I found out, the person that had hurt me was like, "What's wrong with you? Are you so mad that you're okay?" And I was like, "No, I just feel this fullness of joy." Like I couldn't explain, and it wasn't that I felt good. The thing that I had just heard was the worst thing that I would ever want to hear for myself in that time. But for some reason, and I cried. I'm not going to tell you I didn't cry. I cried for a moment. I cried way less than most people would have cried about this situation. And I dealt with it way different from what most people that I've known, that I've seen other people go through this. I dealt with it in a way that I didn't even know was even possible. And it was impossible for me in my own flesh to do it. But I think because I had dealt with all of this stuff along the way, I had asked him to heal me, that when I did receive this problem, it was like, this isn't my problem. This isn't something I have to take on. I have Jesus. And I remember there was a point where I was by myself after hearing what had happened and after not dealing with it, but I was by myself and I started crying. And I said, I don't want to feel pain. I was like, I don't want to feel pain about this. I don't want to do this. I don't want to do it like this, Jesus. But I was like, and I was angry at the person a little bit. But then I remember I was like, I felt a calmness, and I was like, okay, I don't understand this. And then I was like, thank you. And I just started thanking him, and I remember crying my eyes out. So I was like, thank you, because I feel peace. I feel joy. I feel goodness. I feel righteousness. And I was like, why do I feel that way? Because I had him. I didn't care. I could care less if this person did it again and again and again and again at the time. Obviously, I would appreciate that. I don't want to get hurt a million times. But I realized in that very moment, I remember having a revelation of that this is what these verses are talking about. In his presence or fullness of joy. I was like, I didn't care. I remember I had a trip to Honduras 2 days later, and the person was worried that I was going to come and lose it on them before I went on my trip. And then on the way back, and the whole time I was just like, I feel joy, I feel peace, I was excited. I saw amazing testimonies that trip, I remember. That was one of my best trips, I believe. But I believe that it was this, that his joy was filling me so much. And it goes back to in Nehemiah 8:10, in Nehemiah 8:10, he's kind of like giving them like they read out of the book. So the Israelites hadn't like looked at the laws in a long time. They hadn't read over the laws, and here they are. They come and they bring the book of the law out, and they all start reading, you know, the commandments of Moses, and they all start reading, and they're all mourning and weeping and sad and grieving over the fact that nobody has listened to these laws for years and years and years. They realize I think it's because basically they realize how horrible we are, because that was the whole point of the commandments, was so that we could see how we needed Jesus. And what does he tell them? He's like, don't sorrow. The joy of the Lord is your strength. There's something good in Jesus. And I felt like this for myself. Like, I'm not going to sorrow in anything because the joy of the Lord is my strength. But I can really say this because I have someone that's redeemed me, that's brought me peace. I have my joy is found in him. So, for example, if I'm not going to say my kids, but there are parents that are like that their kids bring them grief, and they're mean or rotten little kids to them, and they're like, they fall apart like $2 suitcases. I love that saying because it is true. People have such a hard time with other people, or if their friends say something mean to them or something that was offensive, or, you know, their spouses say something that was offensive, they fall apart. Or if their spouses, you know, did something wrong to them, they're like, I can't, this life is over. And it's like, if this life is all, that's what you have, like, then you're doing this wrong. This shouldn't be about, even joy shouldn't come, that's why I'm saying, joy should not come from someone else. I can say with complete confidence that my joy doesn't come from Johnny. And I've had to learn that. It did used to come from Johnny. Like I said, Johnny was the person that if anything was going on with him, it was bothering me, and the same vice versa for him. If I was a mess, he was a mess. If he was a mess, I was a mess. And that's not good. That doesn't help us. That doesn't bring us... This walk is ours alone. So it doesn't matter what Johnny's doing, what he's not doing. What if Johnny had never been saved, and what if Johnny was walking this life like a heathen and acting crazy and going off and, you know... I have to be able to find joy and not care. Basically is what I'm telling you guys. But it's possible because I've seen it be possible. Not because Johnny's a heathen, but because I've seen things in myself where I've had to deal even with Johnny as my husband, where I've been able to be like, I would be okay. Like, it's not like those people, like, let me say, it's not like those people are like, I don't care if you ever leave me. That's not what I'm saying. But if something happened to Johnny and he did leave me, I would be okay. And not because I'm the strong woman, it would be because I have Jesus. If Betsy, like, I used to be like, oh my God, if Betsy, it's the end of the world if Betsy says that she doesn't believe any of the stuff, or if something goes wrong with how she's believing, or if she falls apart, like if she's depressed, I used to be like this, be like, oh my gosh, what if she says this is the end of the world? But now I can find my joy in Jesus, and so I don't need, so if she were down in the dumps as my pastor, that I wouldn't be affected by her. I'd be able to encourage her, and that's why he wants us to also, because we can't be an encouragement to other people. Sometimes I'll be like, there has to be a point where we all get to that point, so that way we're all encouraging each other. Because that doesn't mean that, for example, just because I have joy doesn't mean that I won't have things that are hard and that I might need encouragement from. Just because you don't have joy all the time, joy is there, but it's just like this fruit of the Spirit. Are we always kind? Are we always good? Are we always patient? I could say that's one that I'm really working on. And do we always have self-control? No. But the fruit of the Spirit comes through growth. Think about the fruit of the Spirit like a tree, right? A tree starts, and then the fruit shows up. So we have to take care of that tree to see the fruit come out of it. So a lot of people are frustrated when they read, for example, Galatians 5, where it says the fruit of the Spirit is this, and they're like, shoot, none of that applies to me. Well, none of that applies to you because are you watering the Holy Spirit? Are you taking care of him? Are you in his presence? Are you, in fellowship with him so that you're growing that fruit? Does anybody have any questions so far? Is it clear what I'm saying? Mm-hmm. Yeah. I just think it's so important because it'll help us in a lot of things. It helps you with anything in life, basically, because if you count on anyone, everyone can mess it up, even myself. So, but if you can count on Jesus, oh, sorry. I heard the kids, but it's so they're listening to something. I think if you can just count on Jesus to be your rock, your solid rock, your solid foundation, then you can count on for anything else. And if you can have joy, then you can deal with the things that come your way that are hard. That's why when, that's why, for example, Courtney, when she had the things that happened to Nene, why was she able to have, even though you guys, we saw her cry, because of course, it's your baby, it's your, she still had joy. Even if you see someone with, our emotions are not joy. Our joy does not show up in emotions. Joy just comes from in us. Like, that's why Jesus, it's like the same thing with peace. Peace, people expect it to look a certain way, but really, like, Jesus was in the middle of a raging storm, and he had peace. The same way we can have a raging storm, and we can have joy. And so, I think that's all.
That was it.
Yeah. Because I don't think there's a lot. We don't have to, I don't think it's, I don't know. Any thoughts? Any
That was good.
questions?
Yeah, I agree.
I just remember, one pastor that I had, that he was talking about that similar thing of like, that his church burned down, and he was like, luckily they had just got like I don't remember, like shortly before that happened, they felt like they should get insurance and take pictures of everything. But that's not why, but I think in that process he had joy because he knew he could depend on God. But he was just like, it wasn't like I wasn't like, yay, my church burned down, I can trust God. But he had joy because he knew that everything would be okay. Like, he
At
just
the
had,
end, like,
like that, just kind of knowing, not necessarily an emotion, like you're saying,
And I think that's what the expectation is like, how am I going to, joy has to feel like happiness, but that's not true. There's nothing that indicates, obviously joy isn't sorrow. So if you're having sorrow, you know that you're not having joy. But you can't also indicate, like, I do think happiness comes out in joy if you're dealing it. Yeah, if you're dealing with it properly. So, like, things that I've had to deal with when it comes to things like that and had joy, I've been able to see eventually, even if it wasn't right on the spot, I've eventually seen the happiness that I had produced from the joy that I had during that time of whatever it was hard. But it was like that. Like, he might have not been smiling the whole time, but he knew it was taken care of. I think it's just that. It's like you just feel like it's the joy of the Lord your strength. So there's nothing you don't have to worry about. And isn't it so much better to have strength from God than it is to have strength in our own strength? There is no strength in us. Like, we can't make anything happen. We can't change certain things that are going to happen. So it's like, if just think about any scenario that you could be in, you can, and just like anything else, joy is also a choice. It's kind of like a choice to have joy. You can choose to, it's like anything else, you can choose to shut it off and say, I'm not going to have joy in this moment. I don't, or you can choose to say, I'm going to have joy no matter what. You have to kind of like,
it's like anything else.
Just like anything else,
Self-control.
And you have to choose to have self-control. You have to choose to
listen to the Holy Spirit. Like,
you have to go pick that fruit and actually eat that fruit. It's not like it's just gonna get in your belly from, like, so it's just the same way. Like, joy comes from that. But I just think it's important because so many times we're going through things, hard things, like medical things, the testimonies today, those are hard. And sometimes we're like, how can I have joy? It's a hard thing to deal with. Well, you can have joy because joy it's kind of like faith. It's like the reassurance of something that's going to be good. It's the strength in us. So if you have joy, you're going to have strength. If you have joy, you're going to have what you need, because when you ask, you'll have fullness of joy. So basically, like, and the thing is, how do you get to that point is understanding joy. Like, anything, if I want to know how to build a shelf, like this table, if it came in a box, what do? I grab the guide and I read how to build it, right? I don't do the guy's way of just building it to because then sometimes you have extra screws and stuff, but what do I do really is I have the guide, and I read it and I'm like, okay, I have to put this piece with this piece. It's the same way. A lot of people think they can and then they don't understand why it doesn't work out. They don't understand why they have extra pieces or something loose, and then they have to go back and take it apart and rebuild it, right? So it is important to, there's our guide, we have the word, we have our prayer time with God, we have fellowship with him, so we can understand how these things work. And it says clear as day. The thing is, this is like for house church, I'm doing it because I'm teaching, obviously. But really, how would anybody know this if they didn't read this? How would they know that their joy will be full if they ask and receive? They wouldn't know it if they didn't read their Bibles. How would they know that the joy of the Lord is your strength? When I read these things, that's where I get the encouragement. That's where I can say, like, for me, that's where I'll go back and be like, oh wait, that Bible verse said this, so I can stand on this, and I've seen that work. If I didn't know I could stand on something, then how am I going to make it work?
Well, even right now when you were saying that, it made me remember this proverb. A joyful heart is good medicine, but a broken spirit dries up the bones. Like,
That's funny, I scribbled it out.
oh, why?
Because it was, just because. Because I knew you were going to read it. I'm just kidding. But no, it was really good. Honestly, I don't know why I scribbled it out, because then I got a
Because it
different
is good
verse.
medicine, because you have that strength in Jesus,
Yes,
knowing.
But
that,
it is medicine. It's the medicine to any situation. What does medicine do? Really is heal you of whatever it is. So if you have joy in the middle of a situation, it's going to heal the situation. And because think about the opposite. What happens when people are negative? They get the negative results. Like some people hate that whole like, believe, but it's biblical. If you believe in your heart, it's the kids, they're being loud. They're yelling. If you believe in your heart, and you'll receive it. But if you don't, right? It's kind of the same way. Like if we don't really believe it, then we're not going to see it. If we're doing the opposite negative, it goes along with what we were talking about last week. If you're like, well, that's not going to work. Is that joy? That's not how joy works. That's not our strength, right? If there's no strength in it, then that's not joy. If it's like, well, I don't know if that's going to work. I don't know if that's going to turn out. Oh, I'm going to be negative about it. Then that's not joy. Mm-hmm. Negativity, joy isn't a negative thing. It's saying it's strength. It's saying it's full of goodness. It's, that's joy. So if we're doing the opposite, then we know we're doing the wrong way. I always like to see it that way. If something's going, like for example, if something is in the opposite of what I'm trying to achieve, then I know I'm going the wrong way. So I need to turn around and go the right way, right? So if we don't have joy, then we're obviously going in the wrong direction. Turn it around. If you've been saying a lot of negative things, then turn it around and start saying the positive things, or see the positive things. Gosh, this week we were talking about with the kids, Paul was in a prison, and I don't know, I've been reading this Tim Tebow book. I haven't verified this, but it was something he said. He said that in that prison, I really want to find out. This prison where Paul was, there was, it was like where the sewage went through. And so he was saying that Paul would have been up to his hips in poop. And I was like, oh, I need to find this out. Is that true? But this was where he gave thing of saying, if there's anything good, look on those things. Anything. Can you imagine being filled to the hips with poop and being tied up probably with rats and roaches and all the nastiest things? But if there's if there's anything, I can imagine what could have been.
There's a little shine of light through the crack.
I mean, honestly, was it that? Like, did he see a little light and he was like, this is true? I mean, they were praising and worshiping in these prisons. They were doing all this good stuff, but that's joy. Why were they able to praise and worship? Not because they felt happy at being in prison and in this nastiness. I can't even imagine. Because they had joy. That's why they were able to do that. So I just thought it was funny when he said that. I was like, that is nasty. And here we are complaining in our situation. Sometimes I'm like, oh, my day is just going bad. My water tipped over and spilled. It's like, there's anything good. Anything good. And it's like, there's nothing good today. And it's like, oh, well, I just was reading my Bible. Like, gosh, Paul was in a really nasty situation. And he could see the goodness in that. But that's just, it's so important. And then people and going back to depression or addiction. Obviously, addiction is such a different thing because sometimes those people need the help. That's why we're here to, as a church, to help those people. But, even with a depressed person, they're not full of joy. They're depressed, so they're going to continue to be depressed. It wasn't until I was full of joy that I came out of depression. And it wasn't in my perfect healing. I still have healing to do. I know, because we're always working out things. There's probably still things in my heart that need, But I had started a process of healing at that time, and then I started seeing joy, and I was able to come out. Like, a lot of people are like, you weren't really depressed. I've had people tell me, like, you just don't know. You weren't really depressed. You weren't depressed for that long. I've had people tell me, like, I'm like, I wish I had the paperwork to prove it. But I really was diagnosed. I know what I felt. I know that I had this really hard time that just felt dark and just hard. I used to cry every day. Johnny would get home and I'd hand him the kids and I'd be like, I need to go to the room and just cry and lay in bed. How miserable. Like, I think back to that life, it doesn't even feel like my life, because I can't imagine right now being depressed and laying in bed with the windows closed and just in complete misery, feeling that way. But that's because I have so much fullness of joy that even if a day is hard, like if my water spilled, then I would just be like, I have to get up, and the joy inside of me helps me to get to a point where I'm not just laying in bed. I always, like, people are like, well, are you completely healed? No, I'm completely healed of depression. There's, just because you have a down day or something that's giving you a hard time, or if Satan comes and tries to attack you with, like, don't you feel down today? Don't you feel down for no reason? I don't lay in bed, but that's because I have his joy. And so for a lot of people, like, it's really hard. Honestly, joy is a really hard concept for most people, because it's a really hard thing to work. And I know, because I've had to work really hard at it to get to the point where I am, where I can say, gosh, I did come out of taking medication, being super depressed, being depressed to the point that they put that I had suicidal ideation, that I did ideation or something like that, like where I was like if this, and I remember, because I would be like, man, if my kids were not alive, if I didn't have kids, I'd be out of this world. Like, I would have, that's how bad it was. And it was so miserable that people around me started being like, what's wrong with you? Like, what's wrong with you? Like, when they started realizing there was something off. But I can say I don't have to take medication. I don't have to have an uplifting thing that sometimes I don't have everything that I want and need. Well, I do, but in the sense of, like, the earth's wanting and needing. And yet I still have joy. And back then I couldn't find that joy. So I just think it's important for any situation. It's just really the same thing with being addicted to anything, even though I wasn't necessarily addicted to drugs or, obviously I drank. And so even in that, I found joy, and I left that kind of behind. But it's like that with anybody. I used to have, and a lot of times we'll switch. We'll have to be depressed, and then we won't be depressed. But then now we have to find joy in our spouses or someone else that's not going to bring us joy and happiness. But then we get to a point where nobody else will bring me. It doesn't matter. It's like such a good thing, because it gets us out of needing anyone else other than Jesus. And that's what ultimately he wanted, was that relationship with us, that if all we had is him, then we would be okay. So, yeah. You can turn it off.